very strange things going on in your perception, because we're automatically applying white balance constantly, compensating for the differences in kinds of light. Okay? That's something you kind of need to keep in mind, because a lot of people think, why doesn't my camera work like what I see? Well, because you do things to it, and the camera's trying to do things to the signal it gets, and it's a miracle they're as close as they are. Film, like I mentioned before, the chemistry, the film type, all was engineered to give you a certain response. So that's why you had daylight films and indoor films. And you had films that were more saturated and films that were less saturated. Why Kodak made a portrait film and a professional film, it was because it interpreted it in a certain way. When you talk about digital, same thing's happening, but we're kind of having to reinvent the wheel again. If you're shooting a JPEG, you have all these settings on your camera, and it goes through an image processor, an onboard image processing chip that specifically applies some crazy engineer's idea of how to make it give you something that you want. Okay? And they're constantly re-engineering that chip. If you're shooting RAW, the thing changes a little bit. You bring the file into your computer, and that algorithm that converts the RAW file into the TIFF file, or the Photoshop document, or the JPEG, it has a million little settings on it, and it has its own little algorithms that try to apply perception that acts like the human perception does. But it's missing some key ingredients there that we're going to talk about tonight. So we've got these tools for dealing with white balance. Very, very fundamental, primary thing. If all you take away from this tonight is how to do white balance and why you should be doing white balance and why it doesn't work sometimes when it works other times, this is like fundamental color for a camera here. There's a lot of different tools. We're going to go over a number of them I've got up here actually tonight. Color Checker Passport, digital gel card. This is a Y-Bal balance card. I think it's called Y-Bal. It's a cheaper option. And the Kodak Gray card. Kodak Gray card, a lot of people say is okay. It's not as neutral. You know, so there's some advantages to each. I also have some customers that like using these, basically a filter that goes in front of your lens, and you can point it and take a picture of a light. I've actually never used this, and I have had some people say they really don't like it, and other people say they really like it. And I can see why it could do some things that this other one couldn't do. So there's some advantages to both. But the fundamental idea is we're trying to get something neutral to have a reference for what white is. Okay, so camera settings. This primarily applies to shooting JPEGs, but it also you know, affects RAW as well. White balance, setting on your camera. Okay, you can set the color temperature. You can set a custom white balance. You can set the color space on your camera. So if you're doing web work and you're shooting JPEGs, you can set it to one setting. If you're doing you know, stuff that's going to a higher end printing, you can have it set to Adobe RGB versus sRGB right on the camera. And then you've got parameters that basically take that algorithm and modify it. So it says, I like things to be more contrasty, or I want them sharper or less sharp. Just kind of like you picked a different kind of film, you can pick different parameters, and you can pick some of the preset ones, or you can make your own. Most professional cameras that offer an option, or even moderately consumer cameras will offer that. Then you've got the quality option, and this is where you could select between JPEG or RAW. It's the key reason I brought that up. Once you get back to your computer, there's some things that affect color as well. Workflow. When you open the file on the RAW, how it gets imported into your computer can sometimes change the color settings. It usually doesn't actually modify the file. But I had a customer not too long ago that had thousands and thousands of pictures in their computer that seemed really undersaturated because they were bringing it in on a Mac using image capture. A great program. It's built right into the operating system, mainly because it supports some scanners that no longer have drivers. It also is the only way to get your pictures off your iPhone onto your computer. But it has the ability to apply profiles right on the fly. And it was taking her Adobe RGB files and applying sRGB to them. Maybe she told it to. I don't know. But all of these images now were in the wrong setting. I don't think they'd actually been damaged, but she had to build a script to change them all back to Adobe RGB so they looked completely different. And she'd been doing this for a long time. So it's something to be aware of. If you're importing directly into iPhoto, I mean, I don't even do that, but you know, the software you're using, or if you're using a Windows tool, the best thing that I recommend people doing, take the card out of your camera, put it in a card reader, copy the files over. Nothing's messed with it then. So that, you know, that affects JPEGs and RAW because you can use Lightroom to directly import your pictures. You can use, you know, and there's an option there sometimes. And there's millions of different ways of getting things done on computers. So just be aware things can happen at that step. Once you have them on your computer, you need to process through RAW files. And that's a step where massive amounts of color handling is going to happen. And also want to bring up shooting tethered. I had a real hard time naming this because there's specific software. It's primarily used for people who are shooting camera backs, more professional Hasselblad cameras, things like that, Imicon, Phase 1s. But there's also software that does very similar things with your Canon or your Nikon camera. I'm going to go over a few of them at the end, just because they do offer some things that are unique. And maybe if you just pick up on some of the concepts of what they can do, you might not actually have the same software ever even access to it. But they definitely have options that are unique to themselves. So here's the tools we're going to kind of go over specific to color calibration and profiling. For calibration, the Color Checker Passport has software that comes with it that creates color calibrations. There's also an Adobe product that does a very, very similar thing. It's a free from Adobe Labs. You can get a reference from me if you want the link to it. And it reads off the Color Checker, the old Color Checker Mini, the Color Checker Classic, or the new Color Checker Passport. And there's also a number of scripts that calibrate camera RAW that work, again, off the Color Checker, but they can also use the larger Color Checker SG digital Color Checker, and even IT8 targets, all kinds of different things. We'll get into that later. I'm going to go over color profiling, actually building true profiles and not adjustments on your RAW processing, using the i1 product in camera and Colorize. Keep in mind there's a number of other programs. They do similar things. I'm sure there's advantages to all of them that the other ones don't have. These are just the three that I actually have access to and own, and give you a really good idea of what these software packages can do in general. So here's the actual tools, the targets that you're going to take a picture of. Standard Color Checker, the digital Color Checker SG, the old Color Checker digital camera, which is no longer made but still supported by some of the scripts. It was not around too long, but I guess there's still some out there. You know, there's a mini version of the standard Color Checker, the new Color Checker Passport, and then there are a number of companies like Colorize have their own target they've built that have unique characteristics to them. I don't know these two companies, but I found them when I was doing research. QP Card can be supported, and Perfect Pix. There's probably more. I'm sorry if I forgot your product. It's whoever's product is out there. You can also use film targets for creating profiles. This would primarily only be if you were actually photographing film. But, you know, it could create a unique effect. Who knows? I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for general use. So in the workflow, here's some major advantages to shooting JPEGs. You get smaller files. Not so much a big deal anymore because cards, you can get a 1,000,000 gig card for a penny now. Yeah, basically, though. It's getting close. They're just going to give them away. One huge advantage, though, is because the files are smaller, you can shoot faster. So if you're actually shooting action photography, a downhill mountain bike race or something like that, this could make a difference to you. There's no additional conversion needed. You could just email the file to somebody, and you're done. Now, RAW, more control. Huge, huge, huge amount more control. Higher quality is possible from this because of the more control thing. you can customize that algorithm specific to the picture, not just a general kind of setting.